Thanks for joining me again for another Pixie Talks review vlog.
Pixie Talks, reviews and vlogs at Pixie Talks.
This week I'm going to be kicking off another series of top 5 videos. And this time, I want to discuss characters instead of titles. Probably the most important aspect of a story is its characters. And easily some of my favorite characters end up being the villains. Why? Because villains are often completely underdeveloped, but when they are really well developed, they often end up becoming the most interesting and complex characters in the entire story. Now, I'm not just going to discuss the villains themselves here, but also a little bit the heroes that fight them. The reason being is that a villain very much needs his nemesis, much in the same way that a hero is made by his. It's a relationship that the Joker understands implicitly.
Without Batman, crime has no punchline.
So, without further ado, let's delve into my top 5 favorite villains. And the first character on my list is a rather nostalgic one for me. The Digimon Emperor.
Bully. Number 1, don't ever talk to me without calling me sir. Number 2, don't ever talk to me! Whoever among
Digimon is a very nostalgic show for me, and the Digimon Emperor is by far the best villain that show ever aired. The first season had one major weakness in that it never had really well-developed villains. And Ken marked the first in the franchise's more tragic and complex bad guys. He was complicated, he was deranged, and he was ludicrously over-the-top hammy. Most of his great hero versus villain scenes were going toe-to-toe with an enraged Davis, but it was actually TK that had the biggest bone to pick with him, and in the end TK again that could relate to him. Davis and TK both were forces in the fight against him that sparked great amounts of rage chemistry, and every scene between him and one of these Digidestins was rippling with tension. But TK was the one with prior experience with adventures in the digital world, so he took Ken's takeover attempt pretty personally rather than just on principle. Ken is a pretty tragic character with a ludicrously extensive and heart-wrenchingly dark backstory for a children's show. Unfortunately, after his redemption arc, the writers kind of left him by the wayside, and he didn't get to be nearly as interesting a good guy as he was a bad guy. Next up is cult classic favorite, Jareth.
Sarah, beware. I have been generous up until now, but I can be cruel.
Oh my, David Bowie. Labyrinth is one of those really weird, trippy films from the 80s that became a cult classic phenomenon despite a poor box office release. And Jareth, the Goblin King, is definitely one of the most interesting villains to ever grace the screen. It is almost impossible, however, to talk about Jareth without also talking about Sarah. This film is, after all, despite its light-hearted adventure surface, a dark romance. Sarah is drawn to Jareth as much as she is repelled by him, and Jareth ostensibly does everything he does in an odd attempt to woo her. Jareth is a man who wields authority as the Goblin King, and wants Sarah to acknowledge and submit to that authority because he is in love with her. Conceptually, the ideas being tossed around in this film are complicated and rather adult. The film at its core is a struggle of will, portraying a woman struggling to resist a man who is in turn actually struggling to resist her. Wow. As a result, Jareth is one of the most charismatically scary figures you could ask for. Every time he pops up in the story is a moment of extreme tension and anxiety, and David Bowie portrayed that charisma to a T. And while Sarah does succeed in the end in defeating him, it isn't for lack of the desperate pleas of a jilted lover on Jareth's part. Next on the list is a character that many would argue is the greatest villain in the history of cinema, Khan.
I intend to take this ship. Agree.
In the original Star Trek episode Space Seed, Khan is a very charismatic and self-assured character. He's charming, he's witty, he's got that kind of presence that commands your attention, if not your respect and allegiance. Every interaction between him and another is riddled with power games, even his romance with one of Kirk's crew members. But Kirk himself is also a rather imposing and charismatic figure. And that is why the two of them make such a brilliant pair when pitted against each other. Flash forward to the Wrath of Khan, and you have a very bitter man. But never once in the Wrath of Khan does he let his guard down. We get moments where we understand his pain and sorrow, but never a moment where we don't feel like he is in complete control. He never doubts his superiority or his own right to revenge. This is what makes him scary. It's that confidence and self-assurance that made him the character that he was, right up to the very end of his life. And while he may not have topped him, there's only one character in recent film that has come anywhere close. Loki.
It's the unspoken truth of humanity that you crave subjugation.
And I am sure that you knew that this guy would be on this list. Loki is a freaking amazing villain and has generated droves of fangirls. Nostalgia Critic's video, Why is Loki So Hot, kind of missed the reason entirely, although it did touch on it briefly. I've said the word charisma in this video an awful lot, and that is because a good villain needs to have boatloads of it. A charismatic person is one who exudes a presence that just makes you automatically take note of them. Have you ever met someone who you just feel instinctively must be a person with authority? The best villains are dripping with this stuff, and Loki is brilliant. It doesn't matter if he's getting his butt kicked or if he's captured in chains. He always has an air of authority. Like Khan, Loki is so full of self-assurance that his situation doesn't matter. He still always carries himself with the knowledge of his own superiority. But he wasn't always like that, which brings me to his nemesis, Thor. Loki hadn't yet come into his own in the movie Thor, but the seeds were there as his relationship with his brother crumbled. By the time the characters come to Thor 2, their interactions are so tense and strained that you almost believe they hate each other. And yet there are glimpses of a struggle within both of them to mend what was broken, though it is plain that this is impossible for them. And lastly, the Phantom of the Opera.
Who is that in there?
I am your angel of music.
Christine!
Come to me, angel of music.
Oh my gosh, this play is absolutely amazing. I love it. Much like Labyrinth, Phantom of the Opera is a dark romance that delves into the concept of attraction and fear/repulsion being mixed together. But unlike Labyrinth, Phantom of the Opera is a lot more upfront about that dynamic. The tension and chemistry between Christine and the Phantom is undeniable, and it's clear there is something compelling to her about her otherworldly suitor. However, the Phantom is a deeply disturbed individual who approaches relationships in a very abusive and controlling way, making him implicitly someone to be feared. Couple that with a heart-wrenchingly terrible backstory, and you have a character who is all sorts of interesting and complicated. He's a tortured soul in some scenes, he's charismatic and controlling in others. He's a dark figure who is as scary as he is pitiable. These are the kinds of characters that really stick out in your minds as being evenly matched with their heroes. The ones that when they came on screen scared you as a kid and impressed you as an adult. The kind that demand a sort of respect for their dastardly actions.
I said...
Oh, Loki, you don't have to ask twice. And that's it for my video on my top 5 favorite villains. The next top 5 video will be about the best heroes in cinema, but before that, next week is time for ponies! Please be sure to subscribe for more, and I'll see you then. Bye!